What's up, guys? Today on Dirt Lifestyle, we're going to fab up some steering, we're going to fab up a sway bar and a Panhard bar, and it's all going on the 1-ton Land Rover. This video is brought to you by Barnes 4-Wheel Drive. If you're in the market for various builder parts and pieces like you see me use in today's video, I highly recommend you check out Barnes while you're doing your online shopping. You're going to quickly discover it's the lowest prices around without compromising on quality, and if you want to save an additional 10%, use our coupon code DIRTLifestyle at checkout. In the last episode, we built a parallel 3-link suspension for the front of my Land Rover Discovery. I went through some basic concepts on the whiteboard, some things that I wanted to get some of the newer fabricators comfortable with before we moved on to this phase. Today, we're gonna go back to the whiteboard for a little bit. We're gonna build a whole bunch more custom parts, and I wanna arm you guys with some basic concepts that you can use whether you're trying to fine-tune the suspension on an off-the-shelf kit or you're trying to do what we're doing today and just continue building something from scratch. We need to start by lining up our axles and removing the old steering components from the vehicle. After pressing some ball joints into the steering knuckles, they're ready to be installed so we have a solid foundation to measure from while we're building today's parts. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you probably saw the video where I built these steering knuckles. If you are not a regular viewer and this is one of your first videos you've seen and you're interested in this, I will put a link in the description so you can see the how and the why and the design and everything else and what went into building these. So for this video, we are going to be building a bunch of really important components. This joint here is going to go to the steering box. This joint here is going to go across and connect to the other knuckle, and we're going to have to get really tricky with a mount for our Panhard bar. The Panhard bar is going to limit the side-to-side travel of this axle while we're going down the road. With the 3-link, this is going to limit our forward-to-back travel, right? So we need something that's going to limit the side-to-side travel, and that's where the Panhard bar comes into play. There's a lot of things you need to know about a Panhard bar. This is going to be a really tricky adaptation of these brackets because of the placement of this Super Duty center section. It's going to make it to where part of this is going to get welded onto cast, part of it's going to get welded onto steel, and in order for everything to clear, I'm going to be doing some really funky angles and cutting and all kinds of stuff. What I think I'm going to do is I am going to build this, and then we're going to talk about what I had to do in order to make it work, what kinds of sacrifices I had to make, and then we will go to the whiteboard and we'll talk about the optimal way to set up a Panhard bar. That is about as good as it gets in terms of the location for a Panhard bar. It's a really good angle. Everything is, I mean, that is just in a perfect spot. This is probably the best location I've been able to make happen for almost any build I've ever done. Now, it's kind of a pain because if you want to remove this diff cover, you've got to remove the Panhard bar, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I want this to ride as perfect as it can going down the road. This bracket is it's a tricky bracket. It's a weird angle and everything else, but I've got it all held together with tack welds right now. The angle is perfect, and because we have some adjustability in this bracket, if the Land Rover has to go taller in order to fit these 37s, I can go up a hole and still have like just the perfect angle on that Panhard bar. So the inside weld where I connected this upper piece to the cast. I knew I wasn't going to be able to reach that once I put the rest of this on there. So if you watched closely in that montage, you saw me break out the stick welder. I used some special cast iron welding rod, and I welded the underside of this upper bracket to the cast iron. So that is a very solid connection, and the rest of this is going to be finish welded in a later video, but for now at least it's all tack welded strong enough that we can cycle the suspension whenever we need to, and we're not worried about it coming off or anything like that. Now I think it is time to go to the whiteboard and explain why I chose the angle that I did and the placement of these brackets. Now I want to take a minute and I want to talk about the best ways to maximize the location and the angle of the Panhard bar, or if you're a Jeep guy, you're going to see it called track bar all the time. And actually, the term track bar has bled into a lot of other communities, not just Jeep communities these days. And if you're overseas, this is a Panhard rod or a track rod, but here in the States, we just call it a Panhard bar. So this little weird squares and squigglies that I have drawn up here is a frame, tire, axle, Panhard bar. It's a front view. And this right here is the orientation that you're going to find in like a 4-inch lift on a JK, a TJ, an XJ, anything like that. A lot of times those companies will give you an aftermarket Panhard bar and it'll mount in the factory location, which is not a great location, on the factory Jeep axle. So this little bend is nice because it helps get the bar out of the way of stuff like your diff, which your diff is actually over here, but you see what I'm saying. But what we're actually looking at would be just a straight line across these 2 points. So even though there's a bend in it, this is going to perform identically to if you just put a straight bar in between these 2 points. This over here is a much better version of this. This is still not ideal, but this is way better because all we did was we put a bracket on top and we're making this bar lateral. So this isn't the best case scenario, but it's really good. You're still going to get some pretty decent performance if you can't move the location on the frame side down. The best way to set this up, which you will never see because it's almost impossible, would be to locate the Panhard bar on the center line of the axle all the way across. And the reason this is impossible is because there's steering in the way. There's all this stuff in the way up there that makes it where you can't do this. But this is what we are shooting for. We're trying to get as close to that as possible. So realistically, if you have a blank canvas and you can put brackets wherever you want, you're probably going to be somewhere in between here and here. And that's actually where we landed on this disco project. This reflects almost perfectly how the disco turned out. We've got the goofy factory bracket that actually comes away from the frame a little bit to one side, and it drops it down super low, which I'm extremely thankful for. Land Rover did a great job designing this bracket because it made it to where all I had to do is bring up the mounting location on the axle just a little bit in order to clear everything. And I've got a perfectly horizontal bar, which is exactly what we want. So if you took a measurement from here to the ground and it was 20 inches, you'd want it to be the same from here to the ground. You want it to be perfectly horizontal. The reason for that is you've got an arc that happens as this Panhard bar swings the axle up and down. So when your axle goes up and down, it hits a bump, it goes up, and then it comes back down. It doesn't just go straight up and down. It actually follows the arc of your Panhard bar. This arc is very important. So right now, our center line of the Panhard bar is horizontal, so we're in this little chunk of the arc that gives us hardly any lateral movement. But if you drop the axle all the way down, you're going to notice that the axle gets pulled along this arc and you have lateral movement. You want to keep this lateral movement as small as possible because this lateral movement equals a less than optimal condition when it comes to stability and the feeling in the wheel. This right here is the orientation of your standard JK, TJ, anything like that with a 4-inch lift. And what you end up seeing is that whenever you follow this arc, it's a lot bigger gap right here. This lateral movement is huge. And you notice you're going to have much more noticeable bump steer conditions and things like that because you're not starting at the center of this arc. You're starting down in the arc a little bit farther. So even though the axle drops the same amount as in this first drawing, it moves over much farther. So if you're hitting bumps going up and down the road, it's swinging that axle over, and you notice that. You notice that in the wheel, you notice that in the handling characteristics, and this is not the ideal way to do this. Yes, you can overcome even bad geometry with like really long wheelbase and a bunch of other things that can mask this problem. But if you just get rid of the problem from the start, then you don't have to try and figure out ways to mask it. This over here is what we're trying to do next, which is make a steering that gets as close to the arc of our track bar as possible. Because when it's not identical, let's say these two green lines were perfectly over each other to where you couldn't even see that there's one behind it, that would be like the most ideal condition when it comes to your steering being lined up with your Panhard bar. You want the arc of both to be identical, and the reason for that is because even though I took a measurement and this is the exact same length for our steering, the exact same length for our Panhard bar, because the steering is up just a little bit, it means that whenever you travel down and you get to the lower part of the axle being dropped out, the distance is slightly different between the two. And this difference between these two distances is going to be something you feel in the steering wheel, and that's bump steer. So this actually, in the real world, this would perform really well, and you'd probably barely notice bump steer. But the whole point and the whole reason to do this drawing is to show you that we want to make it to where basically this distance between here and here is the exact same as this distance between here and here. So if you can, when you're looking at the front of your axle, you want it to where your steering almost overlays perfectly on top of your Panhard bar, to where if you were looking at it from the right angle, you couldn't even see the Panhard bar behind the steering. If you can achieve that, you're gonna have, zero bump steer. Realistically, you're never gonna see that. That's gonna be extremely hard to achieve, but we're trying to get as close to that as possible. I think this is gonna be really close to what we're gonna see in the Disco, and in the real world, this is gonna perform really well. But if you end up having a way longer radius for your steering or a way longer radius for your Panhard bar, whatever, if you push these to their extremes and these two circles start to get really funky and offset from each other, you're gonna notice this is gonna double and this is gonna shrink, and you're gonna notice that is going to feel like crap in the wheel, and it's just not gonna handle as good as it could. So the whole point of all this isn't to try and make everything perfect. It's try to get it as close to perfect as possible. If you don't know these basic concepts and you go to set up your Panhard bar and you go to set up your steering and you don't know that, you don't look at it from this perspective, it's real easy to make something that you just can't figure out why it's got death wobble. You can't figure out why when you go over bumps, it just jerks the wheel all over the place, and you start piling on steering stabilizers and all these things to mask a problem that can be solved before you even get it. So if you're building something with a blank canvas, you can definitely get really close to perfection, and you can use these concepts to understand what you're doing and make it to where you have a much better end result. I'm gonna build this steering system from the top down. I'm gonna start by pulling off the pitman arm. I'm gonna punch a 3/4 inch hole through it and mount a heim joint to that. Then I'm gonna work my way from the drag link down to the tie rod. I expect I'm gonna need to make a whole bunch of bends throughout this system, but you can't make everything perfect. As much as I'd love to keep every bar straight, there's just too much going on up here, and there's gonna be too much interference between parts. Let's start with the good news. Our 1-ton Discovery has steering, and we do have some clearance between here and here, which is great. I was able to bend it to where it just, it fits perfectly. Everything looks really uniform. I'm very pleased with the way this turned out. Super beefy. And this is about the best relationship I've been able to get between a Panhard bar and a drag link. If you look, those are like just stacked right on top of each other. If we were looking at this from a front view, like we did on that whiteboard, we'd be looking at two circles that are just, perfectly in line. This is gonna drive fantastic. However, we have a big clearance problem over here, and I'm not sure how to fix it yet. I'm gonna need some time to think about the best options. So I had to bend the tie rod to try to get around our pitman arm, and this is about as much bend as I wanna put in the tie rod. So if we have too much up travel on this wheel, what's gonna happen is that tie rod is going to end up hitting the pitman arm. So as you can see, they're close, and that's a problem. So I don't know what to do. I have some ideas. And also, some of you guys are gonna ask, why didn't I just place this behind the pitman arm? I'll show you why. Whenever you turn this, the pitman arm ends up closing that gap and there's no room for the tie rod. So as you can see, there's no way I could have made that work. I mean, this tie rod has to be in front of the pitman arm in order for the steering system to work. So I'm gonna turn it straight and then we can talk about what we're gonna do. What I think I'd like to do is build a custom pitman arm. That won't be in this video, but all that really needs to happen is pivoting that joint out of the way. You know, it doesn't contact that bad from what I can tell, because out here, it takes a lot of wheel travel out here to equal a little wheel travel in there. And I think that if I take and I build a custom pitman arm and I pivot this joint in a little bit, maybe at a 45, it should clear no problem. So I think that's gonna be our plan. Either way, we do have steering. It all does work. And I think the next thing I wanna do is work on these sway bars. The sway bar we're using today is from a company called Antirock. I am a giant fan of this sway bar, which is why I contacted them and I wanted to partner up with them for this project, because I've had these on my TJ for a while now. I have front and rear. The rear actually doesn't clear right now, so I had to pull the rear off. But I have these on my TJ and I love them. They provide extra stability, extra traction. The stability is kind of obvious, right? You connect this to the frame, you connect these two links to your axle, and it helps resist the side to side. But a lot of people don't realize that this helps give you extra traction if you have a rear sway bar installed as well. And in a little bit, I'll show you exactly why. But for the rear sway bar, we're gonna use the factory disco sway bar because it's a pretty thin sway bar and allows a lot of flex back there. So it's gonna complement this front sway bar really well. And I'll show you what the front factory sway bar looked like on the disco. It's this super thick beast right here. This is made to keep the disco from going side to side when you're going fast, but there is no give in it when you're going slow. So if you go off-road and you have that factory disco sway bar on there, or a lot of factory sway bars in the front, you're gonna have one tire up in the air every time you get off camber. It's, you know, that's something that's not desirable whenever you're gonna go off-road as much as I do. So an upgrade to a good aftermarket sway bar is a must for me. If you guys are a disco owner and you wanna see the exact universal kit that I have here, I will put that in the description. And if you wanna save 10% off of it for any of you guys that are interested in these sway bars, you can use our coupon code and you can save yourself a little bit of money. Before I ordered this sway bar kit from Rock Jock, I pulled some basic measurements on the disco and it looked like if I could find a sway bar that was about 36 inches, it was gonna work perfect. Sure enough, Antirock makes a universal 36-inch sway bar kit. I wanted to also figure out a way to mount this without drilling holes in the frame and welding it to the frame, and it's not that big of a deal, but it's just time consuming and I didn't want to have to deal with it. So on a whim, I took some measurements of the saddle brackets that were for the factory sway bar. The ID of these saddle brackets happens to match the OD of this tube perfectly, which is gonna make this setup an absolute breeze. I can't believe I haven't seen anyone else in the disco community do this yet, because I think that once word gets out, you're gonna start seeing a lot of these on Discoveries. I'm so excited at how easy a lot of this is going together. We've got a couple things that we're gonna have to trim and tune, but it's not that big of a deal. So up here, I wanna weld the tube to that saddle. I'm super pleased that it fits so snug in there. But I can't get the saddle all the way off with the placement of this jack stand, and I can't remove this jack stand until the vehicle's sitting on its own weight. So once it's sitting on its own weight, I'll be able to pull that saddle, I'm gonna weld it to the tube and make sure that there's no sliding or anything in the future. I wanna make sure that this is just trouble-free, and I think that that's gonna be a good way to go about it. Now here, this one hole will contact that bracket if I leave it on there. So with my TJ, I just cut the two holes off here because when I was tuning it, it fits perfect like in the middle. So I like the ride quality on the TJ. I'm just gonna do the same thing here. I'm just gonna put it in the middle hole. This would be the softest, this would be the stiffest, and as you change that leverage point, it makes this stiffer or softer. It's pretty sweet that you have the ability to tune the sway bar. But in any case, I don't need these extra ones, so I'm gonna cut those off. I'll clean it up and then just put some black spray paint on it. Down here, I'm gonna cut the ends off and do the exact same thing. The rods that came with the kit were a little bit long for my purposes. I might use a longer one on this side and a shorter one on the other, whatever. I had some extra rods in the back of the shop for the rear sway bar and the TJ, so I threw those in there just for mock-up purposes. And this side is mocked up in a way where, I mean, it's somewhat functional. I just need to do a little bit trimming and it works. The other side is a little bit more of an issue. Let me grab an extra light so we can see over there. And what's going on here is the placement of this rod. So you can order different length rods from Rock Chalk. I'm gonna get the shortest one they make, and then probably at ride height, this is gonna be up at a little bit more of an angle. And what I wanna do is I wanna finish weld all of this before I add a tab here. I'm basically just gonna put a tab like right below this bad boy, and I don't want that tab to be in the way of me welding this cast. I wanna have lots of room to fill in and weld that cast really well. I wanna have lots of room to weld here, lots of room to weld there. So I'm gonna finish weld the axle completely before I finish tacking and you know, figuring out exactly how this side's gonna go together. But in any case, it's in. It looks like everything's gonna clear throughout the radius as long as I trim those 2 holes. And I'm very happy. I can't wait to have a suspension that is so complete it even has fully functional sway bars front and rear. For those of you who are new to the channel, this is my Jeep TJ. This is my main wheeler. And I want to talk real quick about why you get extra traction with a sway bar than you do without a sway bar. It's really simple. Whenever this tire, let's say the driver's side tire is going up over a rock, that sway bar is resisting the difference in height. It's trying to keep the tires and the chassis level with each other. So as this is lifting up, it's actually trying to lift up the other tire at the same time, and it can't do that. You can't pick up both front tires off the ground unless you're trying to pop a wheelie, right? So in the same line of thought, this tire is actually pulling the driver tire down. So as this tire goes up and over the obstacle, it has more weight on the obstacle than it would without the sway bar, because it's technically applying some of the weight from your passenger tire onto the driver. This is really nice because a lot of times when you're trying to climb up over an obstacle, this tire will get really light. And with a sway bar, it does the opposite. This tire gets really heavy. It applies more force onto the obstacle as you're trying to crawl over it. Another thing that's nice is that once this is on top and you're trying to pull the other tire up over the other side, when this tire starts to go up, it's actually lighter because this tire it's higher than this tire is. So as the passenger tire tries to go up and meet the same plane and regain level, it's actually making that tire lighter. I've experienced this multiple times. You really can tell a difference when you're running a sway bar and you start to flex out as to where that extra pressure is being applied onto your obstacles. And if you have them front and rear, they work together. It works even better. So if this tire goes up, I mean, it's really common. When you're wheeling off-road, as your driver tire goes up, usually you get into a situation where the passenger rear tire will go up. And because they're kind of going opposite corners like that, it works together in a way that you've got a lot of traction where you need it in the rear, a lot of traction where you need it in the front, and it's like cheating. It sticks to the rocks so much better than without having sway bar. And this is something that I've been aware of for a few years now, and I will run sway bars on every off-road vehicle I have because it's such a performance advantage on and off-road. We're gonna try something new in this series. I want to answer your questions from the video before in this video. So the first video's questions are gonna be answered right now, and then the second video's questions, which is this one, are gonna be answered in the next one. And I'm doing this because I get so many questions now and so many emails and so many DMs that I can't keep up with it. So things that I see getting asked a lot or that I think would be good to cover, I'm just gonna use this little chunk at the end of the video. I'm gonna answer 3 or 4 of your guys' questions, go over some of the finer details, and we'll just see how this works. We'll see if you guys like it. So the first one is from someone named Orion Stuckey. Hey Nate, great video as always. I was just wondering why you don't put any bends in your control arms. This is one that I've been asked more than once. I like to keep everything straight unless I have to put a bend in it. Keeping it straight makes it easier to fine tune because you have a right hand thread joint on one side, a left hand thread joint on the other. You can spin it and you can shrink or expand the distance in order to fine tune your suspension. So if you put a bend in it, now you've got this big wobbly thing and you usually can't do that anymore. So you've got to disconnect one end so you can spin the spin the control arm out and then twist one of the heim joints. It's just kind of a pain. So there's no need to put a bend in anything unless it's specifically to clear something else that's in the way. That's why I don't do that. Next question is from Nathaniel Fox. Awesome video as always. How come you didn't make the arms longer than factory? You seem obsessed in a good way with long arms in your TJ. Is factory long enough in this case? Long arms or long enough for overlanding? Other reasons? What are the lengths compared to your TJ? Thanks. Can't wait for the next video. Thanks for the question, man. They are more than adequate. The issue with the short arms on a TJ, an XJ, a ZJ is that they're like this long. They're extremely short. So, you know, 2 inches of down travel, you start to see that radius pull back. And we talked about radius over on the whiteboard a few times in this video. So I would say that the long arm, the factory arm on the Disco being like 2.5 times longer than a factory arm in a TJ means it's basically a factory long arm. I took a measurement because you asked this question of the Disco versus the TJ. The TJ was a little bit under 38 inches hole to hole, and the Disco in that factory location, the arm that I made was a little bit longer than 36 hole to hole. So they're almost the exact same. I would say that long arm is up to interpretation, but this is absolutely a long arm in my book, and it's going to work great. Next question is from Ben Mandel, I believe. Mandel? I think it's Mandel. So since they canceled SEMA, is this for next year? Or are they still planning on running Trail to SEMA minus the SEMA? We are still doing Trail to SEMA 2020. Chris, the guy that puts it all on, is very determined to make this work. All of us that are on Trail to SEMA are very determined to make this work. And I know where we're meeting up. I don't know what trails we're doing, and I don't know where we're ending. Before, you know, you're ending at SEMA. It's Trail to SEMA. I anticipate we're going to end in Las Vegas. I'm really interested to see what kind of bow Chris puts on this trip at the very end to kind of sum up the trip. But in any case, you will definitely see this Disco on that trip. Next question is from Jonathan Stathis. Why no plug welds in the links? I don't put plug welds in the links. I don't think it's necessary. If you have a really good sized void to fill with weld and you have a good welder and you have a clean joint, it's not coming off of there. It's just not. I've never had a weld fail on a weld-on bung. So some people, for those of you who don't know, will take and they'll put so if you've got the end of the tube, it ends, you put the bung in, they will drill a hole, sometimes 2 holes, so you can plug weld behind it, and then they weld on top of that, and I just don't see it necessary. I would say if you're going to sleeve tube, a plug weld is not a bad idea. In fact, I think that it's a great idea, but in this instance, I just don't think it's necessary. Last question of the video is from Fog Stain. That's a great name, dude. Nate, where did you get that laser level with the 2 dots? I need one like that. I've attached this in a bunch of different videos into an Amazon shopping cart. I'll do an Amazon shopping cart for this video too, and I will throw the lasers and some different tools that I use in this video in that cart. So if you guys are interested in the lasers, but you can buy them at Home Depot, you can buy them. If you don't want to go to Home Depot, you can go through my Amazon link, and that's awesome, and you support the channel, and we appreciate that. But they are readily available at different construction supplies and places like that. So feel free to shop around. Use our link, don't use our link. Either way, that's a great tool, and I recommend if you're going to do a project like this, make the investment. That's it for the questions and answers portion of the video. The video is now over. I appreciate you guys watching and hanging in there with me all the way to the end. I'm going to start doing this Q&A thing at the end of every video in this series, and just let me know if you like it. Let me know, well, first off, if you do have a question, just ask it in the comments, and I'll do my best to get to the more popular questions or questions that I think people would ask a lot. Also, I'm doing my best here with trying to teach on a whiteboard. I don't know what I'm doing. It's so much easier to have a conversation with someone and point to stuff on a vehicle and teach them these concepts. But I'm doing my best to have this one-way conversation with you and show you how this stuff works on a whiteboard. So I hope that some of this is penetrating and that I don't sound like a complete idiot up here. So if you enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've got a whole bunch of how-to content on here, and this series is just getting started. I'm going to cover so many subjects in this series. I'm really excited to continue on and to get that Land Rover on the trail, and we can test these different theories and the different things that we've talked about and see if there's any changes that can be made. So follow along if you want to see those kinds of things at the end, because to me that kind of stuff is fascinating and I want to share it with you. If you want to help support the channel, go to thedirtlifestyle.com. We have t-shirts, hats, neck gaiters, stickers, all kinds of stuff. So if you want to help support the channel, you can go there. And we also have a link to our Patreon account. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Dirt Lifestyle Nate. We'll see you next time.